Hello everyone. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and let's go.
Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's go. Michael idly scrolled through the news on his iPad while Olivia walked past him. He caught a faint trail of her perfume, something new, not the floral scent she usually wore. With a casual motion, she adjusted her hair and ran her fingers along her neck, almost as if she were checking to make sure everything was in place. He noticed the gesture and let out a small, dry chuckle. "You're not seriously leaving without your coffee, are you?" he muttered, his eyes never leaving the screen. "I've got a meeting in 20 minutes. I am already running behind, I don't have time," she tossed over her shoulder while buttoning her wool coat. Michael watched her walk away. There was something different about her, a light, almost imperceptible grace, a newfound awareness of her own reflection. Olivia had always been confident, but this was a different brand of self-assurance. Her game had already begun. When they first came up with the idea, they both laughed about it. It was supposed to be nothing serious. Just a little experiment to spice things up, a way to put some life back into their marriage. A bit of flirting, a little extra attention from strangers. Where was the harm in that? He remembered sitting at a booth in a dimly lit bar in Newport Beach when Olivia first suggested it. Her eyes were bright, her voice held a teasing edge, but deep down, there was a hidden sense of anticipation. "It won't work if we don't have ground rules," she had said, swirling her cocktail and watching the ice cubes slowly melt into the amber liquid. "If we just go off the rails, it will not be a game anymore, it'll be a total train wreck for our marriage." So they agreed on the terms. Flirting without consequences, you could tease, but you could not cross the line. Attention without follow-through, catch a few eyes, but no actual dates. Everything had to stay at the level of harmless banter, no secret DMs, no physical contact. He didn't see it as a threat until he started noticing how much Olivia was changing. Now, there was something feline about her movements, something calculated. She wasn't just playing the game, she was living for it. As the weeks passed, the shift in Olivia became impossible to ignore. One night, Michael woke up to a faint glow. The light from her iPhone screen was cutting through the dark bedroom. Olivia was lying with her back to him, completely absorbed in a conversation. He could hear the faint tap of her fingers against the glass and saw the corners of her mouth twitch into a slight smile. The second he shifted in bed, she killed the screen and pretended to be fast asleep. The following evening, while she was out on the balcony with a glass of Chardonnay, she took a call. Her voice was muffled, kept low as if she were terrified of being overheard. Michael watched her through the cracked glass of the sliding door, holding his breath so he would not make a sound. He could not make out the words, but the tone of her voice was far too intimate. Everything inside him tightened. He hadn't asked any questions yet. He had not made any accusations. But in his head, the puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. The game they had started was morphing into something else entirely, and he was not sure he knew the rules anymore. Michael could not play the observer anymore. It was time to find out the truth. He started small, casual questions, thinly veiled hints. "How was your day, babe?" had asked innocently, looking her straight in the eye. Olivia would just smile, but there was a flicker of something guarded in her expression. Her answers were short, stripped of any real detail. The next time she went to take a shower, Michael snatched her phone. It was locked. Of course it was, he thought. He knew it was a desperate move, but the anxiety was becoming unbearable. He could hear the water running in the master bath, and in that brief window, his mind raced. Was he making a mistake? What was he even hoping to find? Whenever he caught her on the phone, her voice would drop. It was almost a whisper. "No, not tonight. I see not, yes, soon." Those fragments made his blood boil. He started tracking the details: what time she left the house, who she was texting, the passcode she entered when she thought he was not looking. Michael did not have any doubts left. There was someone else in her life. The suspicions that had been eating at him for weeks finally formed a clear picture. He did not let himself get emotional. Instead, he started making moves. That evening, the second Olivia stepped into the shower and the door clicked shut, he grabbed her phone. He could not bypass the lock, but she'd been careless enough to leave her message previews on. He knew the notifications would tell him more than a month of talking. He waited, his heart thumping in his chest, until the screen lit up. It was a short text from an unsaved number, waiting for you. Tonight at 8:30 p.m. Everything's set, just like we discussed. It felt like a block of ice had settled in his chest. He stared at that one sentence like it was a death warrant. There was no room for error now. Michael put the phone back exactly where he found it and took a slow, steady breath. Inside, a hurricane was raging, but on the outside, he remained cold and calculated. If he wanted the truth, emotions would only get in the way. He checked the time one more time. 8:30 p.m. He still had a window. Later that evening, after Olivia had already slipped out, he got into his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He had decided to tail his own wife. Was he losing his mind? Maybe. Within him, there was no more room for hesitation. When he pulled up across the street from a small upscale bistro with warm light spilling out of the windows, the clock on the dash read 8:27 p.m. Inside, tucked away at one of the back tables, he saw her. Olivia was sitting across from a man who definitely was not a business associate. Her posture, the way she tilted her head, the light touch of her fingers on his wrist, everything about her screamed that this was not about work. She was laughing, her eyes sparkling the way they used to when she and Michael first started dating. He could not hear what they were saying, but he did not need to. He was reading her body language, her facial expressions. Michael knew this was no longer about the rules. He realized she was not playing a game anymore. This was a real, living interest. She wanted to be there. With him. Michael let out a long, slow exhale and closed his eyes. He could have stormed in there, made a massive scene, clocked the guy, and demanded an explanation from his wife. He knew that would just give her an excuse to paint him as the obsessed, jealous husband. Instead, he allowed a small dark smile to touch his lips. He was going to make his move. And it would not be an emotional outburst, it would be a calculated response. He pulled out his phone and opened a chat with Claire, a colleague from his office. "You busy tonight?" Claire replied less than a minute later. "For you? Always free. What's on your mind?" Michael looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the lights of the restaurant reflected back at him. He let out a breath and a corner of his mouth curled up. He knew Claire had been interested in him for a while, and honestly right now, that worked perfectly in his favor. An hour later, he was sitting with Claire at a table in that very same restaurant where he had just seen Olivia with her date. The glass of wine in his hand left wet rings on the table while his eyes scanned the room. Claire was stunning, a striking brunette with bright green eyes and graceful fluid movements. She laughed at his jokes, leaning in close, her fingers grazing his hand whenever she spoke. Michael did everything he could to look completely captivated, but his mind was miles away, circling around the one woman who was still in the room. He saw Olivia stand up from her table. She was not in a rush. She walked slowly toward the bar, ordered something, and leaned against the counter. Her gaze lazily swept across the room, almost accidentally landing on him. There was no shock in her eyes, no anger. Not even a trace of jealousy. Olivia just smiled, a calm, almost approving smile, as if she were saying, "Nice move." Michael felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had expected a reaction, an explosion of rage, shock, maybe even a look of betrayal. But she just took a sip of her drink, then turned back to her companion without looking back. Michael went rigid. He had been looking for a fight, for emotions, for words that could shake this fragile balance. But instead, he was met with nothing but a void. She was playing him. And she was loving every second of it. Claire was saying something, but Michael could not hear her anymore. His fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. He had wanted to make her jealous. He wanted her to feel the exact same thing he was feeling. But now it felt like he had just given her one more reason to keep the game going. He leaned in closer to Claire, forcing a smile and touching her wrist exactly the same way Olivia had touched her date. If this game was going to continue, he had no intention of losing. Back at the house, Michael stared at his suitcase for a long time, as if weighing his next move on a physical scale. The last few days had been buried in a suffocating silence, stiff conversations and wary glances, like two predators waiting to see who would make the first move. He knew Olivia could feel his coldness, but she made zero effort to clear the air. She was just waiting. Watching. He zipped the suitcase with a forced carelessness, letting the latch click shut with a sharp metallic ring. Olivia was leaning against the bedroom doorframe, her arms crossed over her chest. There was not a trace of sadness or regret in her eyes, just a slight focused tension, like she was running a mental calculation. "When will you be back?" she asked. Her voice was flat, almost mechanical, as if she were asking out of a sense of social obligation rather than a genuine need to know. "Sunday evening," he replied without looking her in the eye, burying the lie under his usual work trip tone. She nodded, almost approvingly, as if that timeline suited her perfectly. He waited for something more, maybe a small gesture, a shadow of a doubt, a crack in the porcelain, but he got nothing. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, and the rhythmic sound of a dripping faucet filled the house, leaving him alone in a master bedroom that no longer felt shared. Instead of heading toward John Wayne Airport, he made sure to leave his iPad at the office and disabled his location sharing. He could not risk a Find My notification giving him away. Michael parked his Ford a few blocks away from their house and waited. Orange County was alive with its typical Friday night pulse, people spilling out of bars, headlights cutting through the coastal fog. But his eyes were locked on their front door. The clock hit midnight. The lights in the house went dark, but he knew better. He knew that did not mean her night was over. 5 minutes later, she stepped out. Her movements were confident and brisk, without a hint of caution or looking over her shoulder. She was wearing a form-fitting dark dress and high heels that clicked sharply against the driveway. She pulled the door shut and headed toward the curb. Michael watched her like a hunter tracking prey, but then it hit him, he was not the hunter. She was. The game had flipped the script a long time ago, and he was just struggling to keep up. A black sedan pulled up in front of the house. He could not see the driver through the tint, but the headlights illuminated her face for a split second. She was smiling. Michael's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his hands hurt. She opened the door and slid inside without a single backward glance. The car pulled away. Michael turned the key, the engine humming to life, and followed them, keeping his lights at a distance. This night promised to strip away the last of the lies. But as he sat there, he wondered if he was actually ready to see what was behind the curtain. He trailed them at a safe distance, his eyes glued to the red glow of their taillights. The road led them away from the heart of the city, where the streets grew quieter and the palm trees cast long jagged shadows. His heart beat with a steady muffled rhythm, the way it does right before a fight breaks out. The car eventually turned into the drive of a boutique hotel, the kind of place that was small, expensive, and tucked away. No neon signs, no tourists with rolling luggage. It was a place built for discretion. He watched Olivia step out of the car, smooth down her dress, and casually toss her hair over one shoulder. A man stepped out from the driver's side. He was tall, exuding an easy confidence. He walked up to her, and his hand settled naturally on her waist. She did not pull away. Michael was white-hot with rage. He had expected something else. Maybe a flicker of shame, a hurried look, some sign of nerves. But she moved with a natural ease, as if this whole scenario had been rehearsed 1,000 times. They walked inside. Michael stayed in his car, teeth clenched, watching the heavy glass doors of the lobby swing shut behind them. He took a deep breath, trying to cage the anger screaming in his chest. He could not go in there without a plan. He could not let his blood boil over and ruin the play. He stared at the entrance, analyzing, waiting. The minutes ticked by like hours. Cars passed by on the street, and the occasional pedestrian blurred past in the glow of the street lamps. But she did not come back out. They were not coming back. He finally accepted the reality. This was not a casual encounter or a quick chat. This was a full-blown affair. Just a little longer. He would give them time. Then, he'd make his move. Michael finally climbed out of the car, shoved his hands into his pockets, and walked toward the entrance. He needed to see it. He needed the visual proof to kill the last bit of hope. The lobby hit him with a heavy silence, low ambient lighting, and the indifferent gaze of a night concierge. He pushed further in, stopping at a far corner where he could keep an eye on the elevators. A few moments later, the brass doors of one of the cabs slid open, letting out a couple of guests. He held his breath. And then, there she was. Olivia stepped inside the elevator with total poise. Her companion's eyes were locked on her, devoid of any doubt or worry, as if this were their regular Sunday service. The doors slid shut, and they vanished. The anger was thumping in Michael's temples, but he held it together. He was not the type to throw a tantrum in a lobby. He was the type to see things through to the end. Now he knew exactly where she was. All that was left was to decide the next move. Unexpectedly, even to himself, Michael decided to drive back home. He did not sleep a wink all night. He just sat there, waiting for her to return, not moving, not changing his clothes. The night dragged on, heavy and thick with anticipation. He could have gone back. He could have kicked in the door, seen everything, burned the whole thing down. But then what? If he burst in, he'd be acting on pure, unadulterated rage, not logic, not strategy. He would be the one looking unhinged, while she would just look at him with that same icy calm. He played the scene out in his head 100 times, scrolling through every possible ending. None of them brought him any peace. None of them gave him the answers he actually wanted. Michael stayed motionless, watching the digital clock and listening to the muffled sounds of the city outside fading into the quiet of early morning. Olivia did not get back until a little after 7 a.m. He heard the deadbolt click, and her heels echoed down the hallway. She moved slowly, but she was not being cautious. She walked with the confidence of someone who still owned the place. Michael was already sitting in the kitchen, his fingers drumming a slow rhythmic beat on the mahogany table. Olivia walked into the bedroom, then the bathroom. He heard the shower start, the rustle of clothes. Everything was normal. Everything was as if the world had not just ended. A few minutes later, she walked into the kitchen. Her hair was damp, and there was a hint of exhaustion on her face, but zero stress. She tossed a quick glance his way, then yawned and stretched like she had just woken up from a long, refreshing nap. "Oh, you back already?" Her voice was steady, even a bit lazy. He did not answer right away. He was too busy studying her face, her hands, her complete lack of a guilty tell. "Yeah," he finally forced out. She nodded, walked over to the Keurig, and brewed a cup. She took a sip and made a face. "Cold," she muttered, pouring the rest into the sink. "I should have made a fresh pot." He could not take his eyes off her. Everything, her body language, the lack of nerves, the casual detachment, felt like a performance, yet there was not a single crack in the mask. She was acting as if that night at the hotel with another man simply had not happened. "How was the trip?" she asked suddenly, looking at him over her shoulder. Michael said nothing. He stayed silent for a long, long time. And looking at her now, he realized the most painful part: she truly believed he was still in the dark. And that was what was killing him the most. When Olivia headed into the shower, Michael saw her iPhone sitting on the nightstand and picked it up without a single shred of hesitation. The dim glow from the screen washed over his face. As he scrolled through the message thread with her lover, his fingers gripped the sleek casing, not with force or explosive anger, but with a hollow, numb sensation. The evidence was all right there, leaving zero room for interpretation. There were no grand declarations of love or poetic words. Only short, clinical phrases. "Tonight." "Yes, same room." "Waiting." It was all so simple. Cold. He swiped further, digging deeper into the history. He found dates, times, and a schedule where he was not the main character. He was not even looking for anything specific anymore. He was just staring at the wreckage their arrogant game had made of their marriage. The phone buzzed in his hand, lighting up again. A new notification. He stared at the screen, reading the text as it popped up. "Thanks for last night. You were amazing as always. See you at the same spot this weekend." Michael set the phone back on the table. His hand did not shake. He was not in a rage. He was not shocked. He simply felt nothing. Only a cavernous void filling his chest. Years ago they had sat together and cooked up this risky experiment: seduce others, flirt with the edge, but never cross the line. But Olivia was not playing by those rules anymore. She had adopted someone else's playbook. And now, he was ready to flip the script himself. He dialed Claire's number. "Hey Claire. How about dinner?" he asked, his voice steady and flat. "You've got my attention," she answered with a playful lilt in her voice. "Where are we going?" "The restaurant at the Grand Royal. That hotel downtown." There was a brief pause on the other end, and her voice dropped an octave. "Are you sure about that?" "Positive," he said, catching his own reflection in the hallway mirror. "Meet me there at 8 p.m. He didn't tell her why he had picked that specific spot. But he wanted to see Olivia. He needed to be sure she felt nothing. And he needed to be sure that he did not feel anything either. When he walked into the restaurant, Claire was at his side, her hand resting weightlessly on his forearm. Michael did a quick sweep of the room, and there she was. Olivia was tucked away in a corner booth. Her companion was talking, but her eyes were already locked onto Michael. He felt a slow, icy burn of fury start to simmer deep inside. She did not look away. She did not make a single move that suggested she was flustered or guilty. There was only a faint ghost of a smile, a reminder of the days when they played on the same team. Now, it was a standoff. "Where are you right now, Michael?" Claire's voice snapped him back to the table. "Right here with you," he replied, turning to her with a forced smile. "Should we order a bottle of wine?" "Definitely," she said, choosing not to ask the questions that were clearly on her mind. Dinner was a perfect imitation of a man enjoying the moment. Claire told stories and laughed, her hand occasionally lingering on his. Michael listened and nodded, but every time he felt Olivia's eyes on him from across the room, something inside him turned to stone. But the climax of the evening was still to come. He knew Olivia would not stay in the restaurant. She would head up to a room. And he was going to do the exact same thing. When Michael and Claire finally walked out of the restaurant, he felt the air around him thickening. This was all part of the game. But this time, the stakes were through the roof. He had booked a room on the same floor as Olivia. She knew he was close. He knew that she knew. Claire pressed against him, her voice a soft murmur. Tonight was incredible. Want to keep it going? Michael leaned in, letting his hand brush against her cheek. Tonight? Absolutely. He led her to the door of her room, watching her smile as she slid the keycard into the slot. But instead of saying goodnight, he stepped forward, catching the door before it could click shut, and followed her inside. Claire raised an eyebrow in surprise, but her smile did not fade. "You sure about this?" she whispered, her fingers finding the buttons of his shirt. "Completely," he replied, shutting the door behind him. He was not thinking about tomorrow. He was not dwelling on the fact that Olivia was likely just a few doors down the hall. Right now, there was only this room, this moment, and a desperate urge to erase the line between what used to be a game and what had become his reality. Tonight, he did not feel a single regret. He knew she was only a few yards away. He had heard the faint click of heels and seen her shadow disappear around the corner just as he entered the room. The next day, Michael sat in the living room, staring into a half-empty cup of cold coffee. The house smelled like stale caffeine. Olivia had just walked in from the hotel. She hung up her coat and brushed an invisible speck of dust off her shoulder. No awkwardness, no stutter in her step. It was just a routine movement, as if she had come back from a grocery run rather than another man's bed. He did not move. He was not the man who was going to jump up and scream accusations anymore. The anger had drained out long ago, taking every other emotion with it, leaving nothing but a ringing silence. Olivia set her bag down by the door and stood still for a second, almost like she was gathering her thoughts. But Michael knew better. She was not there for a heart-to-heart. She was just there to be. As if nothing had changed. As if their lives were not currently imploding. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing in from the corners. He could not take the weight of it anymore. "Did you feel even a second of regret?" His voice was flat, like cold steel hitting a floor. She looked up. Her eyes were vacant, calm, and analytical. She did not look away, but she did not speak. He had expected this, but something inside him still crumbled. He wanted her to lie. He wanted her to say yes, even if it was a total fabrication, at least it would have been an effort. But the silence was her only answer. Hollow, indifferent, and painful. His jaw tightened. All this time, he had been waiting for something more. He wanted to see a crack, a spark of remorse, some shadow of pain. He wanted to hear anything that would suggest this had not all been for nothing. But it hit him then. She had moved on from him a long time ago. She had walked away from the game they started together and never looked back. And this time, there was no return trip. Do you even realize what this means? Michael's voice cracked, turning into a low rasp. He did not even know if it was a reproach or a final desperate plea. She did not say a word. She just slowly reached up and slid her wedding band off her finger. She held it for a beat, weighing the decision she had already made. Then, she tossed it onto the mahogany table. The sharp clink of the gold against the wood echoed through the room like the final note of a funeral march. He stared at her. She did not flinch. She did not turn her head. She just stood there, waiting to see if he had anything left to say. He did not. Not because he was out of words, but because everything had already been said. She turned around and walked toward the front door. Her movements were fluid and certain.
No hesitation.
No second guessing. She did not even look back as her hand gripped the handle. She just walked out, leaving a silence behind her that was louder than any shouting match. The door clicked shut, severing her presence from the house, leaving Michael alone with a coldness that bit harder than any words could. Michael stayed in the living room, staring at the ring sitting on the table, a small, circular symbol of a life that no longer existed. He ran a fingertip over the smooth metal, but it felt like nothing. It meant nothing. Not to her, and not to him. And in that moment, the truth finally sank in. In this game, there were no winners. Just two people who thought they could control the fire, only to end up getting burned to the ground. And maybe, in the end, that was the only honest thing they had left. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the cold efficiency of a corporate merger. The mandatory 6-month waiting period felt like a lifetime, but once it passed, everything was handled the California way, clean and clinical. Under the state's community property laws, everything was split 50-50. The house in Newport, the savings, and the remnants of their shared decade were sliced right down the middle until there was nothing left to divide. Olivia thought she had finally secured her grand prize, total freedom. She walked away from the marriage believing she was stepping into a vibrant new life with her companion. But the reality check hit her sooner than she expected. She quickly discovered that for a man like Nick, the thrill was never about her, it was about the chase. He was drawn to the game, the secrecy, and the adrenaline of a forbidden affair. The moment the ink dried on the divorce papers and Olivia became free and fully available, the spark vanished. Without the shadow of a husband or the risk of getting caught, she was no longer a prize to be won. She was just another responsibility. Nick lost interest almost overnight, drifting away to find a new game with new rules. Now, Olivia remains in an expensive high-rise apartment in the heart of Orange County. The rooms are filled with high-end furniture from Restoration Hardware and closets packed with designer labels from South Coast Plaza, but the space feels cavernous and hollow. She is surrounded by luxury, but completely alone. Sitting on her balcony overlooking the Pacific, she finally has to face the truth. She traded the only real solid thing she ever had for a fleeting rush of adrenaline. She played the game until she won, only to realize that the prize was worth absolutely nothing. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.